Ladies and gentlemen, presenting the Professor Greg Dooley and the pundit Steve Clark. Men, take the mic.
It's the Professor and the Pundit with Greg Dooley and Steve Clark, and we are proudly presented by Nick Hopwood, who's a certified financial planner, founder, and president of Peak Wealth Management. Retire with peak confidence. You can visit Nick's website at peakwm.com. And after taking about a month-long hiatus, I have been out of the state most of the month. And Greg, you've been keeping a very busy schedule yourself.
My classes are in full swing, Steve. I couldn't leave. You can't leave, Dooley. You have to teach. My 3 classes had Abigail O'Connor, Steve, the director of nutrition for the football team, speak to my leadership class. And it was fascinating, man. She was fantastic. A couple things. I spoke at University Commons, which is a retirement community here in Ann Arbor, Steve, with people. Someone in the audience had ties or family friends back to the 40s with some of the football players.
Wow.
It was amazing. Like knew of Tom Harmon and that kind of thing. That was fun. And heads up, I am going to speak at the U of M Club down in Naples, Florida, the first week of March. I'm getting unsolicited pinged by groups now to talk, and some of them want to hear my history stuff. A lot of them want to talk about NIL, which hopefully Steve will get into a little bit later in the podcast. So about what's going on, where's it heading,
We talk about that every week as far as I'm concerned, because it is the new way that college football, basketball, and university athletics is going to run by, and it's not settled yet. And everybody's kind of going on an assumption, a likely assumption, but there's still a lot of headwinds. Best way I could describe it. So,
yeah, even if everything falls into place, Steve, like it's supposed to with the settlement, there's still a lot of questions and concerns. So we'll get into that later.
Not going to spend a whole lot of time on it, but Michigan football making a pretty decent stand. Michigan football and Sharon Moore earning a lot of credibility with the wins over Ohio State and the win over Alabama.
Yeah, and what a kind of nice surprise in a difficult season, a transition season. A lot of fans were down. Obviously, the win over Ohio State, but then with a bunch of players opting out, somehow cobbling it together that strange bowl win over Alabama. Boy, fans are feeling pretty good, and I am, about where we left things. As good as you can feel about an 8-5 season, I think. I don't know how you could possibly feel better.
You've beaten 2 Titans of football at the end of the season, and with the one against Alabama, with all of the opt-outs, if there's one thing that I'm convinced now more than ever, if there's one position group that just seems to reload for Michigan, it's the defensive line.
Yeah, my takeaway from both of those games is that we're the baddest mofos on the block. And we are legitimately the toughest team out there. We did it against Alabama. We certainly did it against Ohio State. And it's a problem for people who are playing a different kind of finesse game. Clearly, it's a problem. So with the right pieces and parts on offense, you have to think this team might have a chance next year to do something special. So very cool. I will say this. I was kind of joining that parade of people down on the bowls. Steve, you were joking about it, about the opt-out bowl. And yes, I'm looking at this through maize-colored glasses after the excitement that we turns out we had in our game. But I got to say, I enjoyed a lot of the other bowl games. And, I'm not a big sports gambler, but watching it with guys who were placing little bets in the game does make it a little more fun. And I enjoyed it. That's it. Guilty.
You weren't the only one, Greg.
Yeah.
I mean, ratings were up in the non-playoff bowls. Attendance at these bowls was way down. Michigan and Alabama's TV ratings extremely high, and at least beat one playoff game, the SMU Penn State game.
Oh, I didn't know that.
It beat that in the ratings.
Did it really?
It might have beaten a second one. I believe I read that it was the highest non-New Year's Day 6 ratings game, Michigan-Alabama, in 9 years. So you're not the only one that feels that way. There were a lot of exciting games that came down to the end. There were teams that decided to go for the win and not play for overtime, and then the coaches were being critiqued for not doing the same thing. So there was a lot of excitement that went on in those games.
To me, a big winner is the traditional bowl system out of this, and it did matter. It turned out it really did matter for Michigan, at least for our fans. But you got to assume that the feeling in Schembecker Hall after the way the season is really positive. And that translates to the recruiting trail because it's hard to fake we're miserable, right? It's hard to fake, rather, that we're excited about it. And it's hard to, like, get off that if you're not happy about the way things are going. And the coaches, we're seeing some of that. I don't know how much we're going to go through this, Steve, but, Michigan's made some positive inroads in the transfer portal. This isn't a recruiting podcast, but, all in all, it seems like we're doing all right. So there you go. But down the road in Columbus, Steve, obviously we're in the aftermath of Ohio State's championship. They deserved it. When I looked at the bracket and the way it fell, Penn State had an easier path. They didn't make it through. Other teams had an easier path. Ohio State really didn't. And to me, they proved it. They won it. Hats off. I did text my Ohio State people. I'm still waiting for the text back, Steve, about our championship, which I'll never get. And I got to say this. It doesn't bother me that much for some reason, Steve. And I think, and we can talk about this, but probably because of the numbers 4-3 in 2023. What am I talking about? 4 straight wins over Ohio State. Three Big Ten championships that we have, and we had a Big Ten championship. And then, of course, 2023, we have one of those trophies in our locker room. Because what I was doing was, I remember back in 2021 when they were on the brink of possibly beating Georgia, right, and then playing TCU, a team that we should have beat, and crowning them probably the national champion that year. I remember how it would have felt. I mean, I could feel it, like, oh my God, if they win this game. This is different because of all those numbers I laid out. It just doesn't bother me that much, as it should. Like, if Michigan State won, like, God damn, jealousy, all that stuff of a rival. This just doesn't. It just doesn't bother me.
It's a lot easier when your team wins the national championship the year before.
That's huge. But also and the Big Ten championship, and we beat them.
Yeah.
Right? And everybody else.
I would have preferred Notre Dame to have won the national title. I would
Guilty. Okay, sure.
I would have preferred that.
Yes, I was going for no. Absolutely, we were. And I asked my students, other than a couple people who had some annoying Notre Dame person in their life, yeah, we would have preferred over Notre Dame. No
but
doubt.
there is some upsides. Ohio State winning the Natty meant that the SEC's dominance is on hold. And I can watch the unified turn on each other as they have to admit it, squirm admitting it, and then blame on each other trying to change it. Remember, the entire narrative of November, and SEC had the biggest mouthpiece because they're considered the best conference in the land and have been for some time. All of November was about the SEC saying that if they aren't representing the majority of the at-large spots, then the system is broken.
Right.
That was their talking point. And they didn't advance very far. Their win-loss record in the playoffs was awful, and the Big Ten won for a second straight year. And making people like Paul Feinbaum admit that the Big Ten is now the most dominant conference, at least in the moment, is something that he has to deal with and the SEC has to deal with. And the people that open their mouths the most and say the strongest statements have to cut it back a little bit.
Right. And if you look at why, I don't think you can talk about why if you don't talk about NIL, because we know that it was more prevalent to pay players under the table down in the South. And now, as Sam Webb says, this leveled the playing field, and it did. And it took a little time to kick in. But when we played Georgia down in Florida, Steve, they had an NFL defensive line, okay? You really can't do that anymore if everyone can offer these players opportunities at their schools with NIL. It has leveled the playing field. It is a factor. And again, two years in a row. And remember, Alabama barely made it into the playoff when we played them. Many people thought Florida State should have been in. And here we go. So that's been fun. Are there any other reasons you've enjoyed?
Well, I mean, that if Ohio State's going to win a national championship and did it without winning or even appearing in the Big Ten championship game and did it because they couldn't beat Michigan, I mean, that's an asterisk I can live with.
Yeah.
Okay. And any Buckeye who chastises you that their title doesn't have an asterisk, well, there's your comeback.
Yeah.
There is plenty of asterisks to come back for the fact that you couldn't beat Michigan, you couldn't even win your conference or even appear in your conference championship game.
Well, and that's partly on them because they've raised the stakes on how important this game is, and they did it when they were beating us. The stakes raised somehow, Steve. It could be that next year's game could even be bigger. Like, how can this even be possible? But their fans have a lot to do with that, and so you have to live with the consequences if you don't get it done.
I enjoyed very much during the first round game that Michigan's name seemed to come out of Fowler and Herbstreit's mouth more than Tennessee did, and that was the Buckeyes' opponent.
Yeah, if you took all the college football talk that was in the universe, like before selection and then throughout the playoff, you would have thought that Michigan was in the playoff just as many times as it was brought up. Yes, definitely tied to Ohio State, but elsewhere, it was wild.
It heightened the Michigan-Ohio State rivalry even more.
Again, and how is this possible?
How is it possible? And it's been said by Woody Hayes. It's been said by others. They would rather win the Michigan game than the national championship. And it also kind of, with the two teams winning back-to-back, helped restore the idea that Michigan-Ohio State is college football's top rivalry.
Yeah, well, that's clear. I mean, this is going to be nuts next year, almost no matter what happens, right? And Steve, I think you've pointed out this. Yeah,
the last
somebody's
nuance,
probably going to stay around. It turns out.
Yeah, Ryan Day gets to stay at Ohio State because the talk was if he can't win the Natty, we can't keep him. And I keep all the articles; they're still on my bookmarks. Time has come to say goodbye to Ryan Day. You know, these are the prominent websites that cover Ohio State on a day in, day out basis. So, hey, Ryan Day gets to stick around.
Sure. So he pulled the arrow that Sharon slung at him out of his ass, and he's going to keep coaching another year. Is that right?
Guess so.
Okay. Notre Dame.
Yeah.
Boy, Washington last year. Boy, there's a big gap between winning and losing that championship game for their team, their fan bases. That, you know, the difference between winning and losing is so huge, and that's something that sticks out to me. But they had a nice ride. They had a home game. They had all this. They have some great memories, but boy, not getting it done. But they earned their spot.
This time they did.
Yeah.
Notre Dame wasn't a fraud this time. I think their previous 3 games in the playoff were a joke. One was a 4-touchdown game. The other was a 30-3 loss to Clemson. And then they had a 2-touchdown game against, I think, Alabama again. The point is that this team looked like they deserved to be in a playoff and that they've got big staff and player turnover, not as much as Michigan or Washington.
Yeah, and speaking of Notre Dame, another positive is, if you're a historian, this could have been their 12th national title. So we have that one national title edge over Notre Dame, which was, a nice historical note.
But there is that thing about reaching to the pinnacle and losing it, which means you still haven't won a title since 1988. That's nearly 40 years now. And now all these players are leaving and coaches are leaving, and it's almost like here's this reset button. Now, you've certainly earned your reputation along the way, and you can build things back up. Washington and Michigan really suffered in the win-loss record the following years. Questionable whether Notre Dame might do the same, whether Ohio State's got some struggles coming up, because remember, they retained a lot of players for 2024, and a lot of these players are going to be gone. Ohio State does reload all the time, but they also lost their defensive coordinator, too.
Yeah.
Jim Knowles left Ohio State. Word is they were not getting along. Jim Knowles got a huge pay increase. He's going to be the highest paid defensive coordinator in the history of college football, the first $3 million assistant coach. It seems like Penn State is ready to pony up and is tired of watching what Michigan and Ohio State is doing. They do not want to settle for third best or fourth best or fifth best in this conference. They're saying this year is our time. And my question is James Franklin ready for the pressure cooker of expectations?
Well, what does the evidence show so far when he's in the pressure cooker?
Doesn't win.
It doesn't go so well.
Doesn't win.
Yeah.
But now they're loading up. They've got a lot of talent on the offense that's coming back. The defense has never been a problem. But now Jim Knowles is coming in as a defensive coordinator. And I'm kind of curious your take on this. If Penn State wins the national title, does it say more about James Franklin, or does it say more about Jim Knowles winning back-to-back titles with 2 different teams?
Wow. Great question. Wouldn't that be funny? Like, the public who hates James Franklin lays it all on Jim Knowles. Yeah, I don't know. Great question.
I mean, is there a no-win situation for James Franklin?
Yeah, you wonder how that guy, just suspecting how he might be off the field, might be able to handle that kind of comment. So we'll see.
And the deal is this. If Penn State is going all in, and this is putting all your chips on the table. What is the result in poker when you go all in and you lose? You're out of the game.
You're done. Ohio went all in.
And
sure.
you saw how close it was to being a gas fire.
Yeah. Yep.
So I think Penn State becomes the pressure cooker if it becomes evident that Penn State is going all in. If they're not going all in, well, yeah, I mean, there's always expectations.
Yeah, no doubt.
But it would be different.
So, Steve, quickly, would you change any of the seeding in the playoff? Because I think I would. I think I would keep the automatic bids for the top 5 championship winners, but I think I would seed them 1 to 12 with the top 4 getting the bye. This would allow Notre Dame, if you go along with this logic, to get over, because right now they can't get a bye. But I think I would do that. Do you care about? And I understand, because of the limited regular season schedule and the fact that you're mainly playing your conference, why they want to keep the conference integrity. And I also understand they want to make sure that there's a lot of premium on those championship games. So I understand why this current system is in place. I'm still saying I would probably change it. Have you thought about this at all?
Oh, absolutely. I was surprised and shocked the fall off of last year with the ACC and the Big 12's best teams. Not just their champion. I'm talking about the best teams in their conference. The dramatic fall off in talent, level of play, all of that. The Mountain West ended up being considered the 3rd best conference over the ACC, over the Big 12. And when you have that dramatic of a drop-off, you could tell that the runner-ups in the Big 10 and the SEC were likely better than the best that the ACC and the Big 12 and the Mountain West have to offer. And that allowed these favorable matchups for these runner-ups to make their way through. And maybe that's the answer. Maybe that is the answer, that if they're that much better, they should have an easier path. But the thing is, it's only been 1 year. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's an anomaly where the ACC and the Big 12 were weak. Maybe they get better next year and it kind of resembles what you thought it was going to be. But if not, then yeah, I think you kind of just have them seeded 1 through 12 and give the 4 byes accordingly.
Yeah.
The thing is, this rule won't change for next year unless all of the conference representatives agree to it. And that's going to be a tough thing. That's going to be a tough thing to sell, that we're going to get everybody on board unanimously. It's not a majority. It's a unanimous decision to make a change. And I'm not sure that kind of support is there for a unanimous change. And, of course, Notre Dame wants to say, we want a bye. We want to be able to have a bye. Play a conference.
Yeah.
If that's a part of the factoring into all this thing, playing in a conference championship
And I'd argue
game.
they kind of want to buy. They kind of.
Yeah. Well,
they keep all the money. They don't mind having a home game. They don't mind getting that first-round money.
Absolutely true.
Yeah, so.
Those are all things that go away with a bye.
Yeah, that's right. What else, Steve? We're midway through the hoop season and then some.
It's amazing, isn't it? Michigan basketball 8-2 in the Big Ten at the halfway point. I never would have believed that in October of 2024. Would you?
It's been weird. We Steve and I talk, obviously, and we've talked about this team. If you just fast forwarded me to today and you told me that, I'd be like, oh my gosh, this is wonderful. What a nice surprise. But we've gotten to watch the team for a little bit. And there were times when you think they can compete with anybody. And then there are moments, insert the Minnesota game, insert strange stretches in games where they just turn the ball over 4 times in a row. Sometimes they're tough to watch, Steve. And if you're a fan, but maybe we should expect this with a whole new cast of characters and coaches and everything, and where they're trying to put it together. To me, though, they're tough to watch. But what else do you see?
Well, I mean, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
You're one of the worst teams in the nation in turning the ball over on average. I mean, there's 356 teams, I believe, in Division I. And Michigan a couple weeks ago was like 335th in turnovers. They also give up big double-digit leads. Like they get erased. Like if you're up,
the two are unrelated though. But go ahead.
If you're up by 16, you should probably not trail the rest of the game. It should be lights out. So it does get a little bit frustrating. Now, they've had lately the moxie to start winning games in winning time. And that's nice to see, because you don't want to become the Nebraska football program in college basketball, where if it's a close game and it comes down to the final 2 minutes and making a stop or getting a hoop, and you not do it every single time, you become Nebraska football. You don't want to do that. But Michigan, in like 3 of the last 4 games that they've played, all of which they've won, when it was close, they found a way to win. Michigan started out playing well against teams above 500 in conference play. Right now, Michigan is kind of benefited by playing against teams that are in the lower third in the Big Ten standings. I did not think they would win at Rutgers yesterday, the way that they were playing, the way they were struggling against basement teams. I thought Rutgers went out and blew out Northwestern on Thursday, that Rutgers was going to be really tough to be beaten at Jersey Mike's Arena.
Yeah.
Okay, and Michigan came through, and they not only led most of that game, but when it got close and it came down to the final baskets, it was Michigan that was strong and played enough defense to win the game. So my hat's off to them.
And they won by 3, but Rutgers made a very late 3, which somebody somewhere got bad beated on right on that one.
Oh, it was a 5.5 point margin.
Yeah,
That's right. The spread was 5.5, and it went from 6 to 3.
Game is over. Guy runs down the floor and just jacks one up right at the buzzer and makes it like couldn't have done it. They just kept playing, and so
we'll have to watch Stanford Steve and SVP Monday night to see if they make the cut. If they make the cut. Meanwhile, 8 of the remaining Big Ten games will be played against teams that are 500 or better, and that's going to tell the tale. I would not say Michigan is a lock to make the tournament because, if you start getting on a losing streak playing against the upper division, your seeding can start dropping, and then all of a sudden you're got work to do. But I'm not living in that type of fear. But Michigan's schedule gets tougher in the second half.
No doubt, but they played really well at home by and large. Protect home court, maybe try to steal one on the road. They'll be fine. And the fact that we're even talking about the NCAA tournament, see, that was kind of what I would have hoped of this team, this first team, somehow make the tournament.
When you only win 8 games last year, that almost seems like too big a leap, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, and I like a lot of things I see that Dusty May does. I like how the players seem to support themselves. There's very little, there's these things they do that I really like to see around culture of the team. I think we're heading in a great direction. So overall, man, Dusty May, thank you. Thumbs up, man. Thumbs up.
Hey, it's Nick Hopwood from Peak Wealth Management. Here's some Kalel Mullins and some Gus Johnson for you.
That's just bad for the sport, bad for college football. But at the end of the day, some people gotta learn how to lose.
Do or die for Ohio State. Howard in trouble. Incomplete. Ohio State turns it over on downs. And the Michigan Wolverines will shock the college football world. Michigan will defeat Ohio State for the 4th consecutive time.
Hey, it's Nick Hopwood, CFP at Peak Wealth Management. Reach out to us at peakwm.com/mgoblog to learn more. At Peak, we have 25 years of planning and investing experience. We've been through the tough years in the market. 01, 08, 20, 22. And we've learned how to navigate these bear markets. We've learned how to help mitigate losses and limit the losses, unlike Ohio State, who continues to lose year after year and not learn from their mistakes. Every time they call a run play, it's a gift. Which victory was your favorite and why? Out of 21, 22, 23, or 24? Email me, nick at peakwm.com. We'll read your submission on our podcast episode this week. Search out Nick Hopwood to find the Trust the Plan podcast or youtube.com/peakwealthmgmt.
That's just bad for the sport, bad for college football. But at the end of the day, some people gotta learn how to lose.
And once again, that is peakwm.com. Greg, we're going to spend like the second half of this program talking about all the off-season news when it comes to college athletics, revenue sharing, NIL, what athletic departments have to do, roster management. I tell you, it's again, I've said it before, New World Order.
Yeah, and it's funny because as a teacher who teaches this stuff, you wanna kind of present this stuff in a logical order, and you can't because there's so many tentacles in each part and piece to what's going on. And if there's like a big chunk that I have to cover in a lot of detail this semester, it's the House settlement, right? We've talked about it on here a little bit. What's House? House is a guy named Grant House, and he's an Arizona State swimmer. And why did we end up here? And yes, there are other lawsuits that kind of combined with a similar theme, but as they do, it just named after this guy, Grant House. And he's a swimmer of all people. And he said, look, you have an NIL now. I couldn't benefit from that. That's wrong, right? That's wrong. Why couldn't I have benefited from my fame when I was an Arizona State swimmer? And of course, the courts, we all get here, and generally they say, okay, stand down. We agree you have a point here. Let's create this settlement. And that's what they've done. And so the first thing they did was provide back pay for a series of athletes back to 2016 up to 2024. So players who played this last season will be eligible. And what they did, they've got a bunch of money. Some of it's coming from the NCAA, money they have. Some of it's coming from insurance policy that the NCAA has against a class action lawsuit like this. And the rest, Steve, is going to be picked off of future distributions to schools from the NCAA, primarily from the NCAA tournament.
So that number is $2.8 billion over a 10-year period.
Yes.
So that's $280 million per year divided up by the ways you just talked about, including what all of the NCAA teams funneling money from their own athletic department budgets have to provide.
Yes, but I don't think this is going to be a big tap on existing and future budgets. I think the big tap on the budgets is going to come out of the other stuff.
The revenue sharing that's coming up. Let's go back, though, to this back pay for a moment.
Sure.
Because people always want to ask, why is it stopping at 2016? Michigan currently has 300, 400 athletes that have joined a lawsuit saying, hey, I played before 2016, I should get my share. Why is 2016 the number?
I believe it's because there's statute of limitations on suing and time periods.
From what I understand, 4 years since players were told, you cannot do this. You cannot make money doing YouTube videos, Instagram, whatever. And they went back 4 years based on the statute of limitations. And that's why they have that number settled at 2016.
So another common question is, well, how much could a player make? And roughly speaking, a Joe Burrow, a J.J. McCarthy possibly, around $1 million is about the number, is what roughly they could get paid. So there's good money involved, and they have a calculation. They have classes. They put football, men's basketball, and then women's basketball in two of the classes, and then they put all the other sports. So you're like, what about ice hockey? No, there's just this third class about how they're doing the formula. It's not worth it to go in through it, but the majority of the pay goes to where the eyeballs are, which is on men's football, men's basketball, and a little bit for women's basketball. Thank you, Caitlin Clark.
Caitlin Clark from the logo!
So one of the questions is, well, why didn't they just stop there? Because you're a drug company. You know, you've been involved in an accident, right? Like all the things we see on TV. You're a financial investment where there was some insider trading or something went wrong.
You may be entitled to financial compensation.
Usually these lawsuits, it's a class action lawsuit, it stops there. Here's the remedy, usually money, right? Here's how we're going to fix it. Here's the money. The people involved in this knew they couldn't stop there. The lawyers knew we can't just stop looking backward. We have to create a framework to fix this moving forward, to prevent big lawsuits, to prevent other things. And that's where all the other stuff came in. Okay, that's the next stuff. So you have this back pay thing. And by the way, here's the agreement that this lawsuit made. You can opt out of it, right, if you don't want this money. But other than some other legal challenges as the judge changing your mind, this is what it is, okay? And to my knowledge, it's not affected by Title IX. The back pay is not. Other things, here are the damages that we specify. Go get yours. Here's how you apply for your money. That's how it's supposed to work. That's the first thing, right?
That's just step one.
So there are players on Michigan's current roster that will be eligible for back pay. So keep that in mind. TJ Guy, like the guys coming back who played last year. So the second thing it's doing, under the headline of revenue sharing, it's also expanding NIL a little bit. So what it's doing is it's allowing the athletic departments out of their own budgets, nowhere else, there's no money that's funding this from other sources, pay up to $20.5 million a year to their athletes. Okay.
Not required to pay it, but they can pay up to.
Correct. And this is for the P4 conferences. $20.5 million. They arrived at that number by a formula of the average revenue of all these athletic departments, and they came up with a percentage, $20.5 million. Okay. The other thing they did, less important, but now schools can help facilitate NIL deals. I believe, like we see all these ads for tickets where they have an athlete on it, right? Saying, buy tickets to the big game. I think the school can actually pay that athlete for those deals. Now, if they do, that comes out of that $20.5 million.
Right.
Like, so it's a floating scale. But here's the key. Here's the important thing here. To this day, as we sit here, Steve, in February of 2025, no athlete has ever been able to be legally paid directly for just playing their sport. Not even today. You say, well, what is NIL? No. That's something separate. They're supposed to have a deal where they're supposed to perform a service or, show up at an autograph signing and all that, or use their image, which is their fame, for a promotion. But they have to get that deal outside of the court or the field. This changes that. This is saying now we're paying you merely for playing your sport. That's the distinction. Yes, it took, 175 years to finally pay, athletes directly for just playing the sports, but that's what it does, and that's the significance. There are a ton of complications. Steve, here's the headline. Right before Trump took office, the Department of Education said, hey, guess what? Remember us? Remember Title IX? We're supposed to be fair by gender. This applies to Title IX. That's what they said.
They issued guidance in the closing days of the Biden administration.
Yes.
The Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights to be
OCR. And that's where you go if you want to file a complaint. In Michigan, you go to the OCR, the Federal Office of Civil Rights in Cincinnati, and you say, hey, Michigan isn't complying with Title IX, and rat on Michigan. That's where you go.
Does that mean, as of right now, that if the so-called salary cap of $20.5 or $22 million?
20.5.
Okay. That it's got to be split up 10 and a quarter for women and 10 and a quarter for men.
Yes. That's what they are saying.
Right. That can change because there is a new administration. The Trump administration can walk that all back.
They could. I think someone in the Department of Education said, we're probably on our way out. We're going to flex our muscles a little bit. We're gonna shock the world a little bit here, because it was shocking, because what people were assuming, I don't want to confuse everybody, but people were assuming that the payout formula would mimic what the back payout formula is, which is heavily biased toward men's football,
and
obviously men's basketball. So schools, general managers, all the people involved with how this money is going to be divvied up, we're sketching out a plan to distribute roughly about 75% of that $20.5 million for football. Then this came out. Okay. So, Steve, have general managers everywhere panicked and said, maybe they've had a verbal conversation with a player and said, hey, when this comes through, this is how we're going to do it. And for incoming or transfers or someone with your great ability, you might make this. Because if I'm a dad of one of these players, I'd like to know, because it's significant, right? I have a feeling they are still having those conversations.
Yeah, because if I read one lawyer's paper this morning, it was determining whether this revenue of $20.5 million is considered a grant and aid scholarship type of money. It's how you classify where the money is coming from. If you run a business, money inflows and outflows can be directed to certain departments or be interpreted as certain ways. If it is interpreted as a grant and aid or a scholarship, Title IX rules apply. And that's what the Biden administration's OCR says as they were packing their bags and leaving Washington.
And remember, these people are still sitting there. They didn't all just sweep out of there and pack their bags. It's a federal group. However, we know Trump's doing some things with the federal. Go ahead.
Yeah, they're packing.
Yeah, okay, yeah, well, but they're certainly metaphorically packing. Okay, go ahead.
If it's interpreted in a different way, then Title IX rules don't apply. But then you have to be careful that if it's classified as a payment, then could they be considered employees at this point, which is something the NCAA wants to avoid, and universities want to avoid that designation.
Yes. So In their heart of hearts, based on this, the Department of Ed is saying you have to split this equally or proportionally with the student body. There's actually more women at Michigan than men, and that's how they do this. So it's slight. But so if you're asking me, I do think people are going to proceed, defy, whatever you want to call it, assume that this guidance is misguided by the Department of Ed or that it will be overturned or challenged. And I got to say, Steve, I am a huge fan of Title IX. And having seen, read, studied, listened to everyone, it is such an important piece of legislation. To me, it transcends sports, how important it was at the time. It was groundbreaking at the time. And it's important. But what they did was, by saying it applies to this revenue sharing, they're using something that fixed a wrong over here, but they're applying something that fixed a specific wrong to a different wrong, which is A, we should have been paying these players. B, they have a tremendous amount of value, but assuming the value is the same isn't fair to the players. Now here, let's take another lens. Steve, let's do a social and economic profile of different teams. I have a feeling that if you look at the football teams across the United States of America and compare that to golf, lacrosse, field hockey, even ice hockey, rowing, that the socioeconomic data coming from the football program is probably going to be much different. There's opportunity here. There's a different level of opportunity provided inside Schembecker Hall than there is, say, in the field hockey building, okay, or the golf team. So you know where I'm going at. Now let's do it by race, okay? No one likes to talk about it, but the fact there are different demographics and socioeconomic profiles of teams, and then you sum total that with the makeup of these teams, now you're discriminating potentially against race for people who have a great argument that they're filling Michigan Stadium and that the Big Ten TV contracts was widely based on the value they bring in the TV ratings. We talked about the Alabama game. Why do you think everyone's watching? So they will have, if this goes through, a very, very good case to fight it legally for being discriminated against by using Title IX for this purpose.
It's fascinating. So
another group, the DOJ, the Department of Justice, came in and said, hey, I see you want to distribute $20.5 million. That's nice. You can't cap that. That's what they said. They said, you can't cap that. We're Americans. Who's to say that Michigan, Ohio State, Texas, and USC's teams and Alabama's teams are only worth, $20.5 million? You can't cap it. And so we've got that floating out in the universe too, Steve, alongside all of this.
So most every professional sports has a salary cap, but on its philosophy, it seems to be counter to what American values are about.
That's right. And meanwhile, the coaches have hired a fancy lobbyist team, Steve, to start talking to people in Washington about what they want. And you can bet the transfer portal is at the top of their list. Ohio State came out with their budget just recently. Not their budget, their actual financial numbers from last year. And they came out with an over $30 million budget deficit for their large athletic department.
I think it was close to 40. I think it was 38 million.
Yep, and Michigan State did as well. Thank you, Mel Tucker. So not that big, but they came out with a deficit as well. And this, you look at Ohio State, they're one of the crown jewels. They're one of the most valuable, by many stretches, the most valuable, franchise in college athletics. Interesting.
They went all in, and Ross Bjork, who came from Texas A&M, spent a whole bunch of money over there, left with a deficit. He's already got a $38 million hole that I certainly can't blame on him in 1 year. But Ohio State went all in. I think back in the 90s, Ohio State decided to invest money they didn't have into facilities, not just for football, the creation of the Woody Hayes Athletic Center, the Schottenstein Center, all of that sort of stuff. And they literally had no money, but they went and did it anyway. And they reaped the benefit because the money eventually came. Their success came and the money eventually came as well. Seems like Ohio State may be at that moment again where they're, you're down $38 million this year, but we won a national title. The result came through. So will the money inflows come through for them later. I don't know, but boy, it's high stakes. It's high stakes.
I know, and they're going to get a lot of licensing revenue. It's probably going to be a boost because everyone's going to buy their stuff just like we did. But they split all of them. All the playoff money gets split 18 ways or whatever the formula is now with the new teams. They split everything. So I bring that up because when Ohio State's sitting there with this huge deficit and probably, who knows, maybe not heading for it or maybe, when do the Ohio States, when do the Michigans of the world say we're worth more? And
right.
Because
that's what Texas did. Texas said we're worth more.
Yeah.
And they got a nice sweetheart deal from the Big 12. And then they said it still isn't enough, and we're going to the SEC. Again, we haven't even gotten to roster sizes and scholarship limits, restrictions on fake NIL and what's happening to collectors in the future. Let's do that next week. But we got to wrap up the show by things I only care about.
Nobody cares. Nobody cares.
Everybody knows nobody cares.
No one cares.
Nobody cares.
I care.
Then do whatever you want.
All right. The surprisingly popular segment at the end of our program.
We've had offers just to do this on a full podcast, Steve. Not.
The Super Bowl will not be rigged in favor of the Kansas City Chiefs, despite what you see on social media on a daily basis.
This is a hot take.
This is my take.
Okay.
I've watched too many Kansas City Chiefs games. I've seen too many plays that went against the Kansas City Chiefs or would have been if it was rigged. If the officials are really involved and the NFL wants Kansas City to win, there's a whole lot of other plays they could have chosen to take over and let other teams get screwed. And they don't. And then people are going out and changing angles, changing timing, doing whatever they can to make it look like the whole game is rigged. It's not rigged.
Okay.
It is not rigged.
So you care about that?
I care about that.
Yeah, everyone's hating on the Chiefs because of this. Some people are hating on them because of Travis Kelce, ergo Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
I like seeing Taylor Swift at the game, I got to say. I do. And it's probably because we have daughters that like Taylor Swift. I think she's cool. You know who I don't like are the Kelce brothers. I'm completely Kelce'd out. So I'm good with Taylor Swift, not the Kelces. That's something I only care about.
That's funny. The NFL did the right thing the last couple of years, without a doubt. My daughter's watching the NFL. She never cared about the NFL. She now cares about the NFL.
Yeah.
And you start following one team. When you start following one team, you start caring about other teams. Like them or dislike them. You start caring about other players.
Exposure matters.
It was huge. And there's so much angst from men tired of seeing Taylor Swift. The NFL just got more popular. You just brought more women watching the game.
Yeah.
So they ended up doing the right thing.
She had Caitlin Clark with her up there for one of those games. That was cool.
Yes. So is officials being paid off to make sure Kansas City wins? Absolutely not. Not buying that for an instant. Last week, of course, they're showing the replay of whether Josh got the first down or not. And the thing is, it was more controversial on the previous fourth down, just 4 plays earlier, where he dove over the top, lost the football. Kansas City runs out with the football, and the officials, I don't know when the football was lost. You can't tell. Officials go, yeah, Buffalo first down. I mean, if there was a moment where you could change the game and gotten away with it, it was then when Kansas City runs out with the football. No, they said, no, I saw that, but no, he was over the line, he was down. And it's first down Buffalo. Now, of course, on social media, I remember seeing the play where Allen didn't make the first down, and it was a straight-on camera angle. Everything you see on social media shows the slanted camera.
Yeah.
And it changes the perspective of where even 5 yards makes a difference.
Yeah.
In perspective. Anyway, that's my little soapbox. The Super Bowl isn't rigged. Let's just move on. Go Blue, Green.
Go Blue.